With Ernie Harwell. And Ernie Harwell, as everyone knows, is the voice of the Tigers and a Hall of Famer. It's really a pleasure today, Ernie, having you on the air. It's just delightful.
Thank you, Marty. Good to be here.
Oh, well, let's get into your personal life a little bit, Ernie, before we get into the book. And this is a fabulous book, listeners. By the way, the book is called The Babe Signed My Shoe. What a wonderful, wonderful book. Lots of stories, and I think it's one of the most enjoyable books I've ever read. But let's get into your personal life a little bit, Ernie. Where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Georgia. I was born in a little town called Washington, which is east of Atlanta. My family moved to Atlanta when I was 4 years old, and I grew up there in Atlanta. I left Atlanta when I was 30 and went to the Brooklyn Dodgers. But my boyhood and my high school days and the college days were all spent around Atlanta.
I see. And then your first job out of Atlanta was where?
My first job outside of Atlanta was, I guess, the U.S. Marines. They took care of that in 1942. I enlisted in the Marines after I had worked on an Atlanta radio station. And I was in the Marines for 4 years, and I came back to Atlanta. And then when I left Atlanta, I went to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1948. That was my first real job outside of Georgia.
Great. Well, we'll talk about some of those Brooklyn Dodgers stories in a little bit. Meanwhile, I know you're very involved in your community, Ernie. Would you like to share with our listeners some of your civic interests that you really like?
Well, I've been interested in a lot of the facets of the community, but I think I could zero in on one of my favorite endeavors is the Detroit Rescue Mission. Not too far from here, up around the Cascada, and they take care of the homeless. That's their main target. They do a great job with that, and especially in the wintertime when it gets to be severe weather.
Mm-hmm.
They have built a home for families of battered wives where the wives can come in and bring their kids, and until they really get settled, they can live in this Genesis house for maybe even a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have what amounts to halfway houses, too, where they will take people who've been incarcerated and come out and try to find their way into civilian life. They'll give them counseling and help them get on their feet again. So there are a lot of facets of it, and last year we had a parade starting down at the Hart Plaza all the way up through the Cascada, climaxed by a great Christian message by one of our local preachers. And it's a fantastic organization. They do so much work for the good of the community and for the people that are down and out, people that are less fortunate than a lot of us. And I'm just happy to be connected with them.
Yes, it's really a wonderful, wonderful cause. Well, let's get into your new book.
The Babe Signed My Shoe.
Yes, The Babe Signed My Shoe. Where did you get this title from?
Well, the title came fairly easily, Marty. Back in Atlanta when I was a kid, I was growing up in the Atlanta Crackers in the Southern League was my team because I lived there and I followed the guys and they were all heroes of mine. And in the spring of 1930, I guess I was 12 years old at that time, I went out to the old ballpark there, Ponce de Leon Park, and the New York Yankees were playing an exhibition game with the Crackers, my team, and Babe Ruth was in the outfield for the Yankees, and I sneaked down into the box seats right down near the field, and when Babe Ruth came off the field in the late innings, I yelled at him and I said, Mr. Ruth, would you please give me your autograph? And he said, kid, you ain't got anything for me to sign. And I said, well, please sign my shoe. And I stuck my tennis shoe over the railing and gave him a pen, and sure enough, he put his autograph on my tennis shoe.
Yes, and that's actually the jacket of the book. There's a picture of this tennis shoe here.
That's right.
With Babe Ruth's signature. But it's
not the real tennis shoe, but
it's the likeness, though,
yeah,
isn't it?
they recreated the tennis shoe.
Great.
We used to call those shoes in my time Keds, K-E-D-S. Now it would be a Nike or Converse.
Absolutely. I have some Keds at home.
Yeah.
I'm showing my age now. Oh, well, Well, let's get into one of the funniest stories. I tell you, on Sunday I finished reading the book, and my husband was like 3 levels downstairs from where I was at, and he heard me laughing. He says, "What are you laughing about?" And I said, "Well, you won't believe this story." I said, "You know, this has been a great book, but I just can't believe the story I just read." I said, Denny McClain was pitching for the Dodgers, and he was rooming with, what was it, Roy Euler?
Ray Euler, yeah.
Roy,
Denny was.
yes, why don't you
Denny
share the
was,
story?
The Tigers were playing at Boston. They're going to open the season, and this was the night before, and Denny and Ray Euler roomed together. Well, Denny went to bed and he put his contact lenses in a glass of water, as he often did, to keep them intact for the next day when he was going to pitch the opening day game. Well, Ray Euler was one of those fellows who stayed out a little bit, you know, from time to time. And he came in and he drank that glass of water. And the contact lens that went somewhere down in his stomach. So then he gets up in the morning. He's got to go out to pitch the opening day game. He's a little bit on the nervous side, and he begins to look for his contact lenses. And he can't find them anywhere. And all of a sudden, he looks over and he sees that the glass that he put his contact lenses in is empty, and there's no water in there anymore. So his suspicions begin to arise now about his roommate, Ray Euler. So he wakes up Ray and he says, "Hey, have you seen my contact lenses? Do you know anything about this glass?" "Oh, I drank that glass of water." "Well, now we've got a real problem, you know."
Really?
So they have to give him a lot of medicine and everything to try to get that out of his stomach. And finally, I guess, as the saying goes, this too shall pass. And they dug out the contact lens and cleaned it off, and then he put it in his eye, went out and pitched and beat the Boston.
I know. I couldn't believe it, because here is the man who swallowed Denny McClain's contact lenses, had them in his system. I mean, when it went up through one end of him and out the other. And I wondered, what kind of game did he pitch the next day, and did he have clear vision?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And did he pitch a good game?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Wow, unbelievable.
Well, that was Denny McClain. He was unbelievable. And still is, for that matter.
Yes. Another story that I thought was really interesting, because I bet there are not a lot of Americans that know this, but President Eisenhower had a big baseball secret. And why don't you share that with us, Ernie?
Well, that was an interesting story, I thought, because President Eisenhower, when he was growing up, played on some semi-pro teams, and he was really paid to play. And he changed his name to Wilson. He played under the name Wilson. And then when he got to West Point, the cadets had to sign a pledge. The fellows that played in intercollegiate athletics, that they had never played professional baseball, and Ike signed that pledge, and he kept it a secret for a long, long time. And then after the war was over and he came back, was elected president, and some of the reporters dug that out, and he admitted. But I guess the point was that if he had not signed that questionnaire or that application and didn't go to West Point, it might have changed the course of American history. We never know.
Absolutely. I mean, he would have been able to go to West Point, obviously,
right.
Because they weren't allowed to play any type of professional sports
right.
before entering college there. So I thought that was something. I mean, he played with this Kansas League, I believe.
Yeah, it was in the minor leagues, and I guess that was the thing that was done in collegiate circles quite a bit. Guys would play under an assumed name. We had a great catcher and manager here in Detroit, Mickey Cochran, and he went to school out east, and he played under an assumed name when he first started in the professional ranks, so they could keep their eligibility as amateurs.
Yes. Well, thank God. This is one time we're glad the president, I mean, he wasn't a president yet, but we're glad he told a little white lie.
Right.
Because he did become a General Eisenhower, was a tremendous general during World War II. And, of course, obviously a wonderful president, too.
That's right.
So, well, now that we're on that issue of presidents, why don't you share one of your biggest thrills during your baseball announcing career?
Well, I think you're probably referring to going to the White House,
Yes,
Marty,
I am.
and that is something, you know, it's it's really awe-inspiring, I think, when you go to the White House, and I've been fortunate enough to be there about 3 times, and it's just something that when you're in that power seat of the world, that it's hard to comprehend that here's a guy, the President of the United States, he's the most powerful man in the world, and you're going to get to say hello to him. And I think the biggest thrill I got was probably when, well, there were 2 of them. President Reagan first. I was there twice with him. The first time, a friend of mine who worked for President Reagan got me over there, and I was just taking a tour of the White House, and I didn't really expect or anticipate to meet the president, and all of a sudden he said, Ernie, the president would like for you to come into the Oval Office and say hello. So that was just flabbergasted me.
Yeah.
I waited in the cabinet room there for a while, and then they came in and got me, and I walked in the Oval Office, and I gave President Reagan a copy of my book, and he signed one for me, and that was fun. And then the next time we went back, the president had a luncheon for the baseball writers and announcers who'd been elected to the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he really enjoyed himself because he'd been an old baseball announcer himself, and he was telling us a lot of stories about some of his experiences as an announcer. And I remember when he came into the room, there were some of the cabinet members there, and the vice president was there, and all these announcers and writers, and most of them were you know, fairly long in age. And he said, well, there's one thing about this. It's nice to be here and play with kids my own age. And then the third time I went into the White House was President Bush was there, and my daughter Julie, my wife Lulu, and Paul Kerry and his wife Nancy were invited because Congress was giving us a luncheon that day. And before we went to the luncheon over on the Capitol Hill, the president asked us to come over and visit with him. So that was great, and I was very much impressed by President Bush.
Yes, actually, didn't President Bush use your a photo of you and he together for his campaign?
Oh, that's right. That was from the luncheon that I referred to earlier. I was sitting next to the Mr. Bush when he was vice president, and then when he ran for president, he had a little brochure, a picture of me and him and Jack Brickhouse, the Chicago announcer, and it said something about meets with business people. You know, that was a slight exaggeration, calling me a business person.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's wonderful. You are a business person.
I don't know.
We're all business people today.
I guess so. We've all got a business one way or the other.
Absolutely. Well, there's another story I really liked, and that's, you know, I'm going to ask you, who do you think is the world's greatest pitcher? And I love the story about Satchel Paige.
Well, there are a lot of great pitchers. I guess, you know, if you go back in history, probably the greatest pitcher was maybe Walter Johnson or Christy Mathewson, if you go way back. But Satchel Paige was a great pitcher and denied the chance to show his greatness because of the color line in the major leagues. And Satchel was born a little bit too early, and his skin wasn't white enough. It was too bad. But Satchel had a way about him that was unique, and he didn't worry about anything. You know, he said, don't look back, somebody might be gaining on you. And when he warmed up, he only took about 4 or 5 pitches. And one time he was playing against Ted Williams, and Williams was going to come up next, and somebody came out to say something to Satchel about the next hitter, and he said, you know who that guy? He says, no, I don't know who he is. He left-handed or right-handed? So he didn't care. He just threw the ball by
You didn't care if it was Ted Williams or
anybody
whoever.
else.
It could have been anybody.
It didn't make any difference.
He just didn't like warming up, did he?
Right.
Another story, like you talked about what was the best trade the Tigers never made?
Probably when Ty Cobb was a young fellow, they brought him up, and he had been sort of cantankerous and hard to handle even in his early days. And it was his second year. He'd had a fair year, and the Cleveland Indians wanted to trade a fellow named Elmer Flick for Ty Cobb. Elmer Flick had won the batting title in the American League. He was a good base stealer, but he was a veteran player and probably a little bit over the hill, but it was an enticing proposition for the Tigers, but they turned down the deal. Elmer Flick stayed at Cleveland. He didn't do anything from then on. Ty Cobb, of course, went on to become one of the great players of all time.
Obviously, yes. Wasn't he born and raised in the Detroit area, too?
No, Ty Cobb was born in Royston, Georgia.
Oh, he was from Georgia,
Yeah.
too. Oh, okay, so I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I did read the whole book, but there were an awful lot of people in that book.
Well,
And a
we
lot
just
of
got
stories.
through doing a movie on Ty Cobb. There's a movie coming out in December called Cobb, and the director is Ron Sheldon, who did Bull Durham
Uh-huh.
and White Men Can't Jump, and he wrote the script and directed the movie, and Tommy Lee Jones plays the role of Ty Cobb.
Oh, really?
And it's a story of Ty Cobb and an old sports writer coming across country and bickering and fighting with each other mostly.
Uh-huh.
But
I'm looking forward to seeing that because I love Bull Durham and I love like Field of Dreams with
Yeah.
Kevin Costner. Those are my kind of movies.
Well, this guy that wrote and directed the movie, Ron Sheldon, played for Baltimore in their farm system and got as high as a AAA, which is the next level of the major leagues.
Oh,
He played at Rochester. Mm.
wow, I did
So he
not
knows
know
baseball,
that.
yeah.
He sure does.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Actually, that leads into my next question. I'd like to know, does a minor leaguer ever turn down the chance to get into the major leagues?
Oh, sometimes. I think we've had examples of that. Guys that felt like they liked the, especially on the West Coast, the Pacific Coast League was a very strong league back in the old days, and they played pretty good salaries. And there were guys who didn't want to come to the major leagues because they were making too much money, and they didn't want to play in the East, and they liked the schedule and the weather out in California.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of people that just don't care. You know, I guess they like the area, like this one gentleman from Denver that you talked about in the
Right.
book.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to leave Denver.
Right. That's the way it
Denver's
goes.
great. You're great.
Sure.
You know.
Well, you make a choice.
Well, you know, we have one more quick story I'd like to have you tell us about, and that was late in the season, baseball tempers flare. Tell me what happened on September the 6th, 1953, when the Dodgers were running away with the pennant.
I was with the Giants then at the Polo Grounds, and the Dodgers and the Giants were playing the game, and Carl Furillo was hit by a pitch by the Giant pitcher, Gomez, and Carl Furillo knew that Leo DeRocha, the Giant manager, had ordered the pitcher to hit him with a ball. So he trotted down to first base, and the Giant dugout was right there, very near first base. So when Furillo got to first base, he hesitated for a moment, and then he turned and left the base and ran directly toward the Giant dugout and jumped on Leo DeRocha. And they had a fight, and everybody got in the fight, and Marty Irvin stepped on Carl Furillo's hand and knocked him out of action. And Bill Engel was the umpire at first base. And in those days, everybody hated DeRocha anyway. So somebody asked Bill Engel, said, well, why didn't you call time? You know, why would you let a guy run off the base? Why didn't you call time? He said, I wanted him to go get the guy. I wasn't going to call time.
That's right. I mean, he actually got him into a hammerlock, right, with his arm, and he got spiked, and unbelievable. I mean, this umpire just let him go ahead and
Just
do it.
let him go, right.
Yes, well, they said that the Yankees really didn't like Leo DeRocha much. Well, a lot of them. I wondered why.
Well, a lot of people didn't like Leo. He was a strong personality. He was a great manager. I was very fond of Leo. I worked with him 3 or 4 years, and I thought he was a fantastic manager, but he was so aggressive and so forward that he made a lot of people mad.
I see. Well, I wondered because several years ago, my husband flew me out to Las Vegas for my birthday, and I found myself at Caesar's Palace wandering around with a friend. Anyway, what happened is unbelievable. They brought me into this party where Frank Sinatra was, my girlfriend and I, and they sat us down at a table next to Leo DeRocha and Joe Louis.
That's pretty good.
I mean, for a poor farm girl, I thought, my goodness, I mean, heard of Leo DeRocha and Joe Louis, but never actually thought I'd be sitting at a table with them. I didn't stay too much time there because, of course, my husband was gambling. I had to get back to him.
Get back and save the family riches, right?
That's right, Ernie. Well, I thank you so much for being on You and Your Business today, Ernie. I wish you much luck and continued success with your book, The Babe Signed My Shoe. And I'm going to buy about 20 books. In fact, listeners, if you're looking for a birthday present, upcoming Christmas present, I mean, this is a great gift. It's not only good for men, but it's great for women because Ernie even tells us women how to keep score on a scorecard. And we'll learn Ernie's system of keeping score. Right, Ernie?
Right, Marty. It's been great to be with you, and just keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ernie. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.